The rain fell in a soft, unrelenting curtain over street. Augustine's cemetery, blurring the edges of the gravestones like a half-forgotten dream. I stood under the sagging branches of an ancient oak, my coat soaked through, watching the small crowd huddle beneath black umbrellas. They were here for Margaret Hale, the woman everyone called the widow. At 72, she carried herself with the kind of grace that made people whisper about her past, about the husband she'd lost decades ago, about the quiet life she'd led since, tending to the church's garden and knitting blankets for the orphanage. They said she was a saint, a relic of devotion. But I knew better. I knew the truth she'd buried, the one that tied her to me in ways no one could imagine. My name is Clara Winters, and I'm 68, though the years have carved deeper lines into my face than my age suggests. I'd come back to this small New England town after 40 years, drawn by a letter from Father Daniel, the priest who'd known me as a girl. The letter was brief, almost cryptic. Clara, you must return. There's something you need to know about Margaret Hale. The will is to be read after her funeral. I hadn't seen Margaret since I was 20. Since the night I fled this town with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of scars. Yet here I was, standing in the rain, watching strangers mourn a woman they thought they knew. The funeral was simple, as Margaret had requested. Father Daniel stood at the head of the grave, his voice steady despite the drizzle. Margaret Hale was a woman of faith, he began, his words carrying over the soft patter of rain. She gave to this community without asking for anything in return. The crowd nodded, some dabbing their eyes. I stayed at the back, my hands clenched in my pockets. I didn't cry. Not for her. Not yet. As the service ended, the mourners drifted toward the church for tea and memories, their voices low and reverent. I lingered by the grave, staring at the fresh earth. Margaret's headstone was modest, engraved only with her name and dates, 1953-2025. No mention of a husband, no epitaph. It was as if her life had been a blank page, carefully curated to reveal nothing. I wondered if anyone else noticed the absence, or if they were too busy painting her as the perfect widow. Clara. Father Daniel's voice broke my thoughts. He stood a few feet away, his cassock damp, his eyes kind but searching. Will you come inside? The reading is about to begin. I nodded, following him into the church's small meeting room. The air smelled of old wood and candle wax, and the mourners sat in a loose circle, their faces a mix of curiosity and fatigue. At the center was Margaret's lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, a wiry man with glasses perched on his nose. He cleared his throat, unfolding a crisp document. We gathered to read the last will and testament of Margaret Hale. He began. The room stilled, all eyes on him. I sat near the back, my heart pounding in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't know what I was waiting for, only that Father Daniel's letter had promised answers. Hargrove's voice was dry, methodical, as he listed Margaret's modest bequests, her savings to the church, her books to the library, her garden tools to the community center. The crowd murmured approval, their image of the saintly widow intact. Then Hargrove paused, adjusting his glasses. And to Clara Winters, he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Margaret Hale leaves her entire estate, her house, her land, and all remaining assets. A gasp rippled through the room. Heads turned, eyes landing on me like accusations. I felt the weight of their stares. The unspoken question, who is Clara Winters? And why her? I kept my gaze on Hargrove, my hands trembling in my lap. Father Daniel touched my shoulder, a silent anchor. Clara, Hargrove continued, Margaret also left a letter for you, to be read privately after this meeting. He handed me a sealed envelope, its edges yellowed with age. My fingers brushed the paper, and for a moment, I was 20 again, standing in Margaret's kitchen, her voice sharp with anger, her eyes cold with betrayal. The room erupted into whispers, but I barely heard them. My mind was elsewhere, spiraling back to the summer of 1975, when Margaret and I were inseparable. We were young then, barely out of our teens, working at the town's only diner. She was the beauty golden hair, a laugh that turned heads. I was the quiet one, always in her shadow, content to listen as she spun dreams of leaving this town for something bigger. But there was someone else between us, someone who changed everything. Thomas Hale, the man who would become her husband, the man who loved me first. I slipped the envelope into my coat, avoiding the curious glances as I stood. "Thank you," I said to Hargrove, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Father Daniel led me to a small office at the back of the church, closing the door behind us. "Clara," he said softly, "Margaret asked me to make sure you got this. She said it would explain everything." I nodded, unable to speak. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, as if it held not just paper but the weight of 40 years. I didn't open it yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I looked at Father Daniel, his face lined with the same kindness I remembered from childhood. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why did she choose me? He hesitated, then said, "Margaret carried many secrets. Clara, I think she wanted you to know the truth, her truth." I left the church without another word, the envelope burning a hole in my pocket. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. I walked to my car, parked at the edge of town, and sat there for a long time, staring at the envelope. Margaret Hale, the widow everyone loved, had left me everything. But why? What truth was she trying to tell me, after all these years? As I drove to the inn where I was staying, the memories came flooding back. Margaret and I had been like sisters once, sharing secrets under the stars, promising to always have each other's backs. But promises break, and ours shattered the night Thomas proposed to her. Not me. I left town the next day, vowing never to return. Yet here I was, pulled back by a woman I'd tried to forget. A woman whose life had been a mystery to everyone but me. I didn't know it then, but that envelope would unravel everything, not just Margaret's secrets, but the ones I'd buried too. The truth wasn't just about her widowhood or her will. It was about love, betrayal, and the sacrifices we make to protect the ones we care about, even when they hurt us most. That night, in the dim light of my room at the inn, I opened Margaret's letter. The paper was thin, almost fragile, as if it might crumble under my touch. Her handwriting was unmistakable, elegant loops and careful strokes. The same script she'd used to write me notes when we were girls. My hands shook as I unfolded it, and for a moment, I wasn't sure I could read it. But I did. I had to. "Clara," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've come back to a place I know you swore you'd never see again. I don't blame you for leaving. I never did. But there are things I need you to know, things I couldn't say when we were young and foolish. Please, read this to the end. You deserve the truth, even if it hurts." I set the letter down, my breath catching. The truth. What truth could she possibly owe me after 40 years of silence? I forced myself to keep reading, each word pulling me deeper into the past. Margaret wrote of our youth, of the summer we spent laughing in the diner, serving coffee to truckers and dreaming of lives beyond this sleepy town. She wrote of Thomas, how his smile lit up the room, how his quiet intensity made us both feel alive. I remembered him vividly, tall, with dark eyes that seemed to see through you. A man who spoke softly but carried a weight of ambition. He was 23, just a year older than us, working as a mechanic but dreaming of building something bigger. Maybe a business, maybe a legacy. She described the night he proposed to her, how it happened in the diner's back room after closing, with the jukebox playing faintly in the background. You weren't there, Clara, she wrote. You'd left early. Said you weren't feeling well. But I knew you loved him. I saw it in the way you looked at him. The way you lingered when he talked. I should have told him no. I should have told you first. But I was selfish. I wanted him. And I thought you'd forgive me. I closed my eyes. The memory sharp as a blade. I hadn't been sick that night. I'd left because I saw them together. Saw the way Thomas looked at her. The way she leaned into him. I knew then that I'd lost him. That the dreams we'd whispered about under the stars were hers now. Not mine. The next day, I packed my things and left for Boston. Cutting ties with everyone. Including Margaret. I built a life there small. Quiet. Solitary. I never married. Never let anyone close enough to hurt me again. Her letter continued. Each word heavier than the last. Thomas and I married quickly. Too quickly. I thought love would be enough. But it wasn't. He was kind. Clara. But he was restless. He wanted more than this town. More than me. A year into our marriage, he started staying out late. Coming home with the scent of whiskey and secrets. I found love letters. Not from you. But from someone else. I confronted him. And he didn't deny it. He said he'd made a mistake. That he should have chosen you. My heart stopped. Thomas had loved me. After all these years, I'd thought he'd chosen Margaret because she was better, brighter, more deserving. But her words painted a different picture. One of regret and fracture. I didn't tell you. She wrote. I was too proud. Too ashamed. I thought if I held on, he'd come back to me. But he didn't. He left one night. No note. No goodbye. I told everyone he'd died in a car accident. It was easier than admitting he'd abandoned me. The room spun. Margaret, the widow, wasn't a widow at all. She'd built a life on a lie, letting the town wrap her in sympathy while she carried the shame of abandonment. But why leave me her estate? Why pull me back into this? I stayed in this town because it was all I had. She wrote. I built a life of service, hoping it would erase what I'd done to you. But it never did. When I got sick last year, I knew I had to make things right. The house, the land, it's not much, but it's yours. It was always yours. There's more. Clara, in the house. Find the box under the floorboards in my bedroom. It'll tell you the rest. I set the letter down, my hands trembling. A box under the floorboards. It sounded like something out of a story, but Margaret's words were too raw, too real, to be fiction. I wanted to be angry, to hate her for stealing Thomas, for lying to everyone, for dragging me back here. But all I felt was a deep, aching sadness for her, for me, for the years we'd lost to pride and pain. The next morning, I drove to Margaret's house. It was a small, weathered cottage at the edge of town, surrounded by the garden she'd tended for decades. The air smelled of lavender and damp earth, and the front door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, everything was as I remembered from our youth, the faded floral curtains, the wooden table where we'd shared coffee and secrets. But now it felt like a museum, preserving a life that wasn't what it seemed. I climbed the stairs to her bedroom, my heart pounding. The floorboards were old, some loose, and it didn't take long to find the one that gave under my touch. Beneath it was a small metal box, rusted at the edges. I pried it open, my breath shallow, and found a stack of letters tied with a red ribbon. They weren't from Thomas, as I'd expected. They were from letters I'd written to Margaret after I left. Letters I'd never sent, pouring out my hurt, my anger, my love for her despite it all. How had she gotten them? Tucked among them was a photograph of the three of us, Margaret, Thomas, and me laughing outside the diner, our arms around each other. On the back, in Margaret's handwriting, were the words, "We were happy once. I'm sorry I broke us." I sat on the floor, the photograph in my hands, and wept. Not just for Margaret, but for the girl I'd been, The one who thought love was simple, who thought friendship could weather anything. I didn't know what the other letters held, but I knew I couldn't read them yet. The weight of one truth was enough for now. The days that followed were a blur of rain and memory. I stayed in Margaret's house, sleeping in her guest room, unable to face her bedroom again. The box of letters sat on the kitchen table, untouched, a silent challenge I wasn't ready to meet. The town buzzed with gossip. Clara Winters, the mysterious beneficiary, the woman no one remembered. They whispered about me in the grocery store, at the post office, their eyes lingering as if I were a ghost. I didn't care. My world had narrowed to the house, the letters, and the question of what Margaret wanted me to do with her truth. Father Daniel visited on the third day, bringing a casserole from the church ladies. "They're curious about you," he said, setting the dish on the counter. "But they mean well. They think I'm an interloper," I replied, pouring him tea. "They thought Margaret was a widow. They don't know what to make of me." He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Margaret was good at keeping secrets, but she trusted you with them in the end." I wanted to ask him what he knew, how much Margaret had told him, but I didn't. Instead, I asked, "Did she ever talk about me after I left?" He nodded. "She did. Not often, but enough. She said you were the only one who ever really saw her." His words stayed with me long after he left. I thought about the Margaret I'd known, the girl who laughed too loud, who dreamed too big, who loved too fiercely. I'd seen her, yes, but I'd also judged her, blamed her for my pain. Maybe she'd done the same to me. That night, I finally opened the box again. The letters were a mix, some from me, some from Thomas, and a few from Margaret herself, written to no one, as if she needed to confess to the paper. My letters were raw, angry, full of the hurt I'd felt when she married Thomas. "How could you take him from me?" One read, "I thought you were my sister." I cringed, reading my own words, but they were honest, the kind of truth only youth can muster. Thomas's letters were different. They were written after he left, addressed to Margaret from cities I'd never visited: Chicago, Seattle, Denver. "I'm sorry," he wrote in one. "I thought I could be the man you needed, but I'm not. I keep thinking of Clara, of what might have been if I'd had the courage to choose her." My chest tightened. He'd loved me, but he'd left us both, chasing a life that didn't include either of us. Margaret's letters were the hardest to read. They were undated, written in bursts of emotion. "I lied to everyone," one began. "I told them Thomas was dead because it was easier than admitting he didn't want me. I thought if I became someone else, someone good, someone selfless, I could erase what I did to Clara." Another read, "I saw her letters in her room before she left. I took them. I don't know why. Maybe I thought they'd keep her close." I set the letters down, my eyes burning. She'd stolen my letters, kept them all these years, a secret tether to the friend she'd lost. I didn't know whether to be angry or heartbroken. Maybe both. The next day, I walked to the church, needing air, needing answers. Father Daniel was in the garden, pruning Margaret's roses. "She loved these," he said, not looking up. "Said they reminded her of you." "Of me?" I asked, startled. He nodded. "She said you were like a rose, beautiful, but with thorns to protect yourself. She admired that." I didn't know what to say. I'd spent so long seeing Margaret as the villain, the thief of my happiness. But now, with her letters in my hands and her roses blooming before me, I saw her differently, a woman who'd made mistakes, who'd tried to atone in her own quiet way. "Father," I said, "what do I do with this? Her house, her secrets, what does she want from me?" He looked at me, his eyes steady. "She wanted you to understand her, and maybe to forgive her." Forgiveness. The word felt heavy, impossible. I'd carried my anger for so long it had become part of me, But as I stood there, surrounded by Margaret's roses, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. I spent the rest of the day wandering the house, touching the things Margaret had loved: her books, her teacups, the quilt she'd made for the orphanage. Each item told a story of a woman who'd tried to make amends. Not just to me, but to the world. I wondered if I could do the same. If I could find a way to live with the truth instead of running from it. By evening, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't sell the house. I'd stay, at least for now, to sort through the letters, to understand the woman Margaret had become. I didn't know if I could forgive her, but I owed it to both of us to try. The weeks that followed were a quiet unraveling. I settled into Margaret's house, letting its rhythms become my own. Mornings were spent in her garden, pulling weeds and watering roses, my hands learning the work she'd loved. Afternoons were for the letters, reading them slowly, piecing together the fragments of her life. The town watched me from a distance, their curiosity softening into acceptance. I was no longer just the stranger who'd inherited Margaret's estate. I was Clara, the woman tending her legacy. The letters revealed more than I'd expected. Margaret had written about her life after Thomas left, how she'd thrown herself into the church, the orphanage, the community, not out of faith, but out of guilt. I thought if I did enough good, I could balance the scales. She wrote. But nothing erases the past. She wrote about the nights she'd cried for Thomas, for me, for the life she'd imagined. She wrote about the lies she'd told, how it grew heavier with every sympathetic glance from the townspeople. Thomas's letters painted a different picture. He'd wandered for years, never settling, never finding what he was looking for. I keep seeing your face, Margaret, he wrote in one. And Clara's. I broke you both, didn't I? His words were a confession, a plea for forgiveness he never dared to ask for in person. The last letter was dated 1985, from a hospital in Portland. I'm sick, he wrote. Not long now. I hope you found peace. Margaret. Tell Clara I'm sorry. I wondered if he'd died alone, if he'd ever known the weight of his choices. My own letters were the hardest to revisit. They were raw, unfiltered, written in the heat of betrayal. You took everything from me. One read, I'll never forgive you. But as I read them, I saw something else, not just anger, but love. I'd loved Margaret, loved her like a sister, and that love had made her betrayal cut deeper. I'd blamed her for Thomas, but maybe I'd also blamed her for my own cowardice, for not fighting for what I wanted. One afternoon, I found a letter I hadn't noticed before, tucked at the bottom of the box. It was from Margaret, written just a year ago, addressed to me. Clara, I'm dying. It began. The doctors say it's my heart, but I think it's been broken for years. I've spent my life trying to make up for what I did to you, but I know it's not enough. I'm leaving you the house because it's the only thing I have left to give. There's one last thing I need you to do. Go to the attic. You'll find something there. The attic. I hadn't even thought to look there. I climbed the narrow stairs, the air thick with dust and memory. The attic was small, cluttered with boxes and old furniture. But one item stood out: a wooden chest. Its lock rusted but intact. I pried it open, my hand shaking, and found a quilt, its patches faded but carefully stitched. Beneath it was a journal, its pages filled with Margaret's handwriting. The journal was a record of her life after I left. But it was more than that. It was a love letter to the town, to the people she'd served, to the life she'd built from the ashes of her mistakes. She wrote about the children at the orphanage, how their laughter reminded her of us. She wrote about the roses, how they bloomed despite the frost, how they gave her hope. And she wrote about me, over and over. Clara would have loved this. One entry read, I wish I could tell her I'm sorry. I closed the journal, my throat tight. Margaret had spent her life trying to atone, not just to me, but to herself. She'd built something good, something lasting, even if it was built on a lie. And now she'd given me the chance to do the same. I brought the quilt downstairs, draping it over the couch. It felt like a piece of her, a reminder of the woman she'd become. I didn't know if I could forgive her, but I was starting to understand her. And maybe that was enough for now. The seasons changed, and I stayed. The house became mine in a way I hadn't expected, not just a place to live, but a home. I kept Margaret's garden alive, planting new roses, tending the ones she'd loved. The townspeople began to visit, first out of curiosity, then out of kindness. They brought stories of Margaret, how she'd helped them through hard times, how she'd never asked for thanks. I listened, adding their memories to my own, building a fuller picture of the woman I'd once known. I started volunteering at the orphanage, something Margaret had done for years. The children were a whirlwind of energy, their laughter filling the holes in my heart. I told them stories, not about Margaret's lie, but about her kindness, her resilience. I wanted them to know the best of her, the part that had tried to make things right. One day, a package arrived from Father Daniel. Inside was a small wooden box, engraved with my initials. Margaret left this with me. His note read, "She said you'd know when to open it." I set it on the kitchen table, next to the letters, and let it sit there for days. I wasn't ready to face another piece of her, another secret. But curiosity won out. Inside the box was a locket, its silver tarnished but intact. Inside was a tiny photograph of Margaret and me, taken the summer before everything fell apart. We were laughing, our arms around each other, the diner's neon sign glowing behind us. On the back of the locket, etched in tiny letters, were the words, "To Clara, my sister." I held the locket, tears streaming down my face. Margaret had carried me with her, even after I'd left, even after I'd hated her. She'd never stopped seeing me as her sister, even when I'd stopped seeing her. I slipped the locket around my neck, its weight a quiet comfort. That night, I wrote a letter not to Margaret, but to myself. "You've carried this pain too long," I wrote. "Let it go. Not for her, but for you." I didn't know if I'd forgiven her, but I was tired of holding on to the hurt. I wanted to live, not just for Margaret's memory, but for the life I still had left. The next morning, I went to the church and found Father Daniel in his office. "I want to do something for the town," I said. "Something in Margaret's name." He smiled, nodding. "She'd like that." We planned a community garden, a place where the children from the orphanage could plant flowers, where the townspeople could gather. It would be Margaret's legacy, not as the widow, but as the woman who'd loved this town, who'd tried to make amends. I donated part of her estate to fund it, keeping only the house and enough to live on. As we broke ground on the garden, the townspeople came together, their hands in the dirt, their laughter filling the air. I stood back, watching them, the locket warm against my chest. I felt Margaret there, not as a ghost, but as a presence, a reminder that love and loss are two sides of the same coin. The garden opened on a crisp spring morning, the air sweet with the scent of blooming roses. The townspeople gathered, their faces bright with pride and memory. The children from the orphanage ran through the rows of flowers, their laughter echoing like a song. I stood at the edge, the locket around my neck, feeling Margaret's presence in the breeze, in the earth, in the life we'd built. Father Daniel gave a short speech, dedicating the garden to Margaret Hale, a woman who gave her heart to this town. He didn't mention her lie, and neither did I. The truth was ours now, a private bond that didn't need to be shared. The townspeople clapped, some wiping tears, and I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. After the ceremony, a young girl from the orphanage tugged at my hand. "Miss Clara," she said, holding up a drawing of a rose. "This is for you. For Miss Margaret's garden." I took the drawing, my throat tight. "Thank you," I said, kneeling to meet her eyes. She would have loved this. As the crowd dispersed, I walked through the garden, touching the roses, their petals soft against my fingers. I thought of Margaret's journal, her letters, the locket. She'd spent her life trying to make things right. And in her own way, she had. She'd given me her truth, her home, her love. And now, I was giving it back not just to her, but to the town, to the children, to myself. I didn't know if I'd fully forgiven her. Forgiveness is a slow, uneven road, and I was still walking it. But I'd found something else peace. Not just with Margaret, but with the girl I'd been. The one who'd loved and lost and kept going. I'd spent 40 years running from this town. From her. From myself. But now I was here, rooted in the soil of Margaret's garden, ready to live the years I had left. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I sat on a bench in the garden, the locket warm against my skin. I didn't need to open it to see her face, to feel her beside me. We were happy once, I whispered, echoing her words. And maybe we can be again. The roses swayed in the breeze, their scent a promise of spring, of new beginnings. I closed my eyes, letting the moment hold me, knowing that whatever came next, I was home,